Hello, my name is Emily Ramirez. I am a covenant partner here at Doxa, and the scripture for this morning is Matthew 11, 20 through 30. It says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You may be seated.
Well, a few weeks ago, we started a series that we are calling The Pursuit of Happiness. The reason why we call it The Pursuit of Happiness is because we recognize that every single one of us, deep down in our souls, desperately longs to be happy. And not only is this desire in us to be, this desire for happiness, not only is it in us, but we also saw in week 1 was that this desire for happiness is also desire in God. That God desperately wants us to be happy. And what we saw in week 1 was that in order for us to obtain this happiness that satisfies this desire in our soul, that happiness is only found in the presence of Almighty God. That it is in His presence that there is the fullness of joy. At His right hand are pleasures forevermore. Which means that our happiness is dictated by our proximity to God, our intimacy with Him. And then over the last few weeks, what we saw was that there's these threats in our lives that seek to rob us of that joy, to rob us of that happiness by impeding our intimacy with God, hindering our ability to be closer and closer with Him. And so far, what we've seen is that when it comes to these things in our lives that hinders our intimacy with God, hinders our joy in His presence, what we've seen so far is that all these things from a cultural standpoint, we typically view and see as predominantly negative, right? Things like sin, things like worry, things like anxiety are things that we tend to see more so from a negative lens and a negative light. But what we're going to see today as we continue this series together is what we're going to see is that there are also some threats in our life that from a cultural perspective, we don't see them as negative at all, but rather we see them as positive. In fact, what we often do is we actually celebrate some of these things. And one of those things that we're going to take a look at today is busyness in our life. When it comes to our culture, we as a culture celebrate busyness, right? We honor it, right? Just think about whenever you ask someone how their day is going or how their week has been. They say something about how busy they are, right? They're like, "Oh, I'm good, just busy," right? We love to brag about how busy we are. We love to be busy. It's something that we deeply love. But here's the reality about the busyness in our life, is that the great enemy of intimacy is hurry. Hurry is the great enemy of intimacy. Just think about this in our own lives, right? If you were to come to our house between 7 a.m. to 7:45 a.m. Monday through Friday, when we are getting our kids to school, you will not see a restful household. You will see nothing short of chaos, okay? Because me and my wife are trying to get 4 kids to school, and even though they've been going to school for quite a while now, there's still at least one of the kids in our home that just forgets how to get ready for school every single morning. Parents, can you relate to this, right? Like they're just like, "I don't know how to get up." It's like, you do know how to get up. You get up every single day of your life. And so constantly, we're running around our house, telling them things like, "Please get dressed. Please put on your socks. Go brush your teeth. What do you want for lunch? What do you want for breakfast? Where are your shoes? You don't know where your shoes are? Let's go find your shoes. Found one shoe. Where's the other shoe? You don't know? Parents, why are they never together? Why are the shoes never in the same spot? Like literally this happened in our home one time. One time, one of our kids' shoes was found in the bathroom, the other outside under our trampoline. How? How are they in 2 completely different spots? Then as we're getting them out the door, we finally find the shoes by the grace of God. Then I tell my kids this almost every morning. Hey, super cool feature about our home. When we bought it, there's a closet right next to the front door. That's where I put my shoes. That's where all of your extra shoes are. I highly recommend you put your shoes in there when you come home. Then that way the next morning we can wake up and we know where your shoes are. Fast forward 24 hours, where are your shoes? We don't know, right? One's like on the roof. We have no clue how it got there. And it's just chaos. And never once in the midst of that time together as a family has a child of mine come up to me and say, Dad, I just love this time, right? It's just fun. Like, can we do this more? I just love how you're constantly telling us to get out the door. I love the game. Where's my shoes, right? No one tells me that. No one's like, I feel close to you when you're rushing me out the door. Why? Because the enemy of intimacy is hurry. The enemy of intimacy is hurry. And so here's the thing. If intimacy with Jesus is where we find this desire for happiness to be fully satisfied in our life, then what we have to do, what we have to learn, is we have to learn how to deal with the busyness in our life. We have to learn how to deal with the restlessness in us so that we can draw closer to him in intimacy. And that's exactly what we're going to see today. And so if you have a Bible with you, go and open up to Matthew chapter 11. We're going to look at the last 3 verses in this chapter, verses 28 through 30. If you don't have a Bible with you, don't worry. As always, we'll have the verses on the screen behind me so that you can easily follow along. If you don't own a Bible, we'd love to give you one. You can visit one of our hospitality kiosks by our exit doors and pick up a free copy before you leave today. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. I'm going to go ahead and read all 3 verses, okay? And we're going to constantly come back to these throughout our time together. So here's what it says. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The first thing that we see in this passage is we see Jesus invite those who are restless to come find rest in him. And as Jesus makes this invitation to come find rest in him, notice the kind of rest that it is that he provides. And the end of verse 29, or at the end of verse 29, he says, "You will find rest," and then it's specific. He says, "You will find rest for your souls." That it's not just bodily rest, it's not just physical rest, that it is rest for your souls. You see, we can find bodily rest pretty easily. Like, it's pretty easy for our physical bodies to rest. Like, we can just sit on the couch, right? We can turn something on TV. We can just chill out a little bit. We can take some medication. There's a lot of different ways that we can find rest physically. But what Jesus points out here is he says, "Come to me, you will find rest." And specifically, the rest that I can give you is a rest for your souls. And as Jesus identifies that it's a rest for our souls, here's what he's also doing at the same time. He is correctly diagnosing the source of our restlessness. In other words, the reason why we are so busy and so restless externally is because there is an internal restlessness in us. That the source of our restlessness, the source of our busyness, the source of our hurry is found deep in our souls. And that's the kind of rest that Jesus comes to give. You see, in our hearts, in our souls, there is an infinite stream of desires that desperately long to be satisfied. Everything in us and just wants to be satisfied, all of these desires. And those desires in us is what motivates everything that we do. And so the reason why you get out of bed is because there is a desire for that day, right? Maybe that desire was, I just wanted to eat breakfast. Maybe that desire was, man, I have a desire to have some sort of money in my life, which gives me a desire to have a job, which gives me a desire to not be late for that job so I can keep that job, right? Every desire in us that longs to be satisfied motivates everything that we do. To put it this way, one of the core reasons why we are so busy in our life is because our hearts are so restless. There are infinite desires in us that long to be satisfied. And what's interesting is that as soon as we satisfy one of these desires, there is another desire right behind it that craves satisfaction. It is an infinite long line of desires in us that crave to be satisfied. 4th century bishop and theologian Gregory of Nyssa once said it like this. It says, "For as soon as a man satisfies his desire by obtaining what he wants, he starts to desire something else and finds himself empty again. And if he satisfies his desire with this, he becomes empty once again and ready for still another. There is an infinite amount of desires in us, all longing and all craving to find satisfaction. But here's the problem, right? These infinite desires are in us, but we are finite beings, which means that we can't satisfy all of these desires inside of us because we're finite. And so when you take infinite desires and you place them inside of a finite being, what do you get? You get a constant state of restlessness. One desire after the other, longing to be satisfied, making us chase anything that we can possibly chase to satisfy those desires of our soul. What it leads us to is a constant state of restlessness. But here's what's fascinating. What's fascinating is that Jesus tells us that if we come to him, what we will find is we will find rest. Specifically, rest for our souls. Which tells us something just completely profound about who Jesus is. It tells us that Jesus has this ability to satisfy every desire in us. Has this ability to satisfy the infinite stream of desires inside of our souls. That our souls can find rest completely in Jesus because he has the power and the ability to satisfy every desire in us. Every single one. And the reason why Jesus is able to satisfy these things in us is because first and foremost, he is an infinite God. And only an infinite God can satisfy the infinite desires in us. Dallas Willard, who is an American philosopher and author, wrote it like this. He says, desire is infinite, partly because we were made by God, made for God, made to need God, and made to run on God. We can be satisfied only by the one who is infinite, eternal, and able to supply all our needs. We are only at home with God. The reason why there's infinite desires in us, what Dallas Willard points out, is because we were made in the image of a God who is infinite. And there's these constant desires in us that crave satisfaction, but the only way they're going to be satisfied is in Jesus because he is the infinite God come to be in our flesh. Not only that, but what we see in Jesus is we see Jesus perfectly satisfy the wrath of God poured out against sin. One of the desires in us that we constantly aim to satisfy is this desire to somehow cover up our sin, this feeling of shame and guilt. And what Jesus tells us is everything. I can give you rest because I am the one who is infinite and I am the one who satisfies the wrath of God forever. 4th century theologian Augustine put it like this. He says, thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds rest in thee. We were made in the image of an infinite God, and the only thing that will satisfy our souls is finding rest in him. He comes to bring rest. Now, what's interesting is that whenever Jesus invites us to come and experience this rest for our souls, what's fascinating is what he tells us to do as we come to him. Because it's not what we think he would say. Look at the passage with me again. Verse 28, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Hallelujah, praise God. What great news for those of us that are restless today, right? But then he keeps going. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here's what's fascinating about Jesus' invitation to come find rest in him. He tells us first to come to him, and then he tells us to take his yoke upon ourselves. That imagery of a yoke, okay, is whenever you would take two animals and you would kind of tether them together with this piece of wood. And the reason why you would do that is so that they would be able to work together and in other words, accomplish some sort of task. We see this all the time kind of in farming world. It looks something like this. Here's a picture. So here you have two oxen tethered together, yoked together in order to accomplish a task. And so here's what's fascinating. That imagery of a yoke is an imagery that means labor, that we labor alongside him. And so here's the paradox that Jesus invites us into. He says, you want rest? You are restless? If you want rest, come to me, labor with me, and that's where you'll find rest. What a weird thing to say, right? Like, wouldn't we expect in our world today Jesus to say, hey, come to me and just lie down, right? Come to me and take some deep breaths. Like, come to me and just chill out a little bit. That's what we expect. That's not what Jesus says. He says, come to me, be yoked with me, labor with me, and as you labor with me, then there you will find rest. See, that's not how we find rest today, is it? The way that we find rest today is predominantly through the lens of what? Escape, right? That I just want to escape from what's wearing me down in order to find rest for a brief moment in my life. And so what we do is we pull up our phones and we scroll forever to try to find some sense of rest. We turn on our Netflix show that we've seen about 7 times already and say, I'm going to run it back, right? Because we want to find rest for a moment. When we typically try to find rest for our weary souls, the way that we tend to do that is through the avenue of escape. But Jesus doesn't say, come to me and lie down. He doesn't say, come and escape the burdens of the world. The paradox of the gospel is that Jesus says, if you want rest, then come labor alongside me. Come yoke yourself with me. How? How can yoking ourselves with Jesus possibly give us rest? Well, it's interesting. The way that Jesus uses this imagery is not that we are somehow co-laborers with Christ, each carrying an equal load. You see, whenever a farmer would yoke 2 oxen together, oftentimes what the farmer would do is he would take a wiser, older, more mature, stronger ox and yoke it with a younger, weaker, less mature, less experienced ox. And the reason why a farmer would yoke those 2 type of oxen together was not because the stronger ox was like, man, I just need a little bit more effort. If I can just get like the little guy, like that would just help me. That's all I need. No. The older, stronger ox had the ability to pull the plow all by himself. The reason why the farmer would create and tether those 2 oxen together was because he wanted the younger one to learn from the older one. He wanted the younger one to learn how to carry the load. One of the younger one to learn how to hear the farmer's voice and obey its commands. One of the younger one to learn what kind of pace to go on so that they can accomplish the task at hand. What direction to go. That's why they would yoke them together. And what's fascinating is that whenever we look at this imagery that Jesus gives, that's the imagery that he has in his mind. Look at the verse with me again. Verse 28, he says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Then he says, take my yoke upon you and what? Learn from me. The imagery in Jesus' mind as he unpacks this is that as we're yoked with Jesus, it's not co-laboring as if we both share 50% of the weight. It's he is the infinitely stronger, infinitely greater, infinitely wiser ox that we are tethered to learn from. That he sets the pace, he sets the direction, he carries the burden. He does not need us to accomplish his mission in the world. He invites us in to get a front row seat of it and to learn from him. He invites us into intimacy so that we can learn what it's like to live this life and continue to walk down a road that leads more and more and more to the fullness of life, the fullness of joy, and to the abundance of rest for our souls. That's the invitation. It's not Jesus saying, I need help, come in here. He's saying, I got this, offload your load on to me. Let me carry this and learn from me. And you will find rest. Which means that if we are going to learn, okay, what it looks like to pursue the fullness of joy in the presence of God by resting in him, by learning how to handle the busyness in our life so that we can pursue deep intimacy with God, we have to learn how to follow the lead of Jesus. We have to learn how he lives this life. It's an invitation into discipleship. We see how he lives and we mimic it. We follow after his footsteps. And what's fascinating is that whenever we look at the life of Jesus, when we look and see how he lives his life, how he carries this burden, at what pace in which he goes so that he can endure this path with endurance, what's interesting is that Jesus, when we look at his life, is intentionally slow. He's intentionally slow. Never once in Jesus' life do we see him ever in a hurry to get anywhere, even when there's chaos all around him. We can look at Mark chapter 5. Jesus gets off the boat after he just crossed the Sea of Galilee. There's a massive crowd around him. One of the people in the crowd is a guy named Jairus. Jairus runs over to Jesus, says, Jesus, you need to hurry. You need to get to my house. My daughter's sick. I'm afraid she's going to die. Jesus is like, all right, let's go. They start heading to Jairus' house. There's a massive crowd around them. About halfway to his house, there's a woman who comes, sneaks through the crowd, grabs his garment, and gets healed from her disease. As that happened, Mark tells us that Jesus felt power leave his body, which means that Jesus knew already right there that this woman had been healed. And what Jesus does is instead of just continuing to march to Jairus' house to be with his daughter, he stops the crowd. Stops the crowd, invites her in, wants everyone to see what happened with her so that they might see the power of faith and what faith has done in her life. He stops the crowd. And then a messenger from Jairus' house comes to Jesus and says, hey, don't even bother coming anymore. His daughter is dead. The story goes on. Jesus then leaves the crowd, goes to the house, goes to the girl, and wakes her up from the dead. He brings her the miracle of resurrection. But in the middle of that, he just stops the crowd. He slows everything down. Like imagine if you got shot and you're on your way to the hospital and the guy driving the ambulance is like, hey, we just need to go the speed limit. Well, why don't we just pause for a second? Like, let's just take a deep breath, everybody. It's going to be okay. You'd be like, get us to the hospital, right? But Jesus is interesting. He's intentionally slow. We see a similar thing in John chapter 11. In John 11, we see Jesus' friend Lazarus get sick. As he gets sick, the word comes to Jesus that Lazarus is sick and that he also might die. And as Jesus gets this word, this is how he responds in verses 5 and 6. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Cool. So, therefore, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he left immediately. What did he do? He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Like, I don't know about you, but if someone came up to me and was like, hey, a family member that you love dearly is sick, and I'm like, cool, I'm just gonna stay here for 2 days, you'd be like, I don't know if you actually love this person, right? Like, you should get up and go. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, like we got that phone call about my grandmother. My grandmother, I lived in Dallas, Texas. My grandmother was in Jackson, Mississippi at the time. And my dad was already there. She'd been battling cancer for like several years at this point. And we get the phone call from my dad. It says, you need to get here as soon as possible because she's not doing good. And what we did was we climbed into the car. My mom drove from Dallas to Jackson, which is about an 8-hour drive. She made it in 6. And I promise you this, she's one of the slowest people I've ever met in my life. But oftentimes in our lives, that's what it looks like for us. We rush. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't moments in your life where you need to rush. There are certainly some of those moments, okay? But when we look at the pace of Jesus, we see that it is intentionally slow. He prioritizes intimacy with God above everything else. Constantly, Jesus is slowing down. He is constantly breaking away from the crowd just to go and be with the Father, to pray and to be in his presence. And if we are going to learn how to have this kind of rest that leads to the fullness of joy in the presence of God, then we have to learn how to follow Jesus in this way. We have to learn how to slow down and be with him. Now, I recognize that as I say that, okay, there's some of us in this room who are thinking, okay, Chris, I hear you, but there's nothing that I'm carrying that I can just offload, right? Like I got kids, I got jobs, I got bills to pay. I can't just offload these things. And I get that. I totally get that. And the invitation for Jesus is not necessarily that we need to remove some of the load that we are carrying. The invitation for Jesus is that we redistribute the load onto him. That we yoke ourselves with him, that he's the one that carries that. You see, there's some of us in the room that we do need to offload some stuff, right? Like you've said yes to like one too many things. Like you don't need 7 jobs, all right? And there's some of us in this room that's like you just have overcommitted yourself. And then there's others of us that's like, I just can't offload some of these things. But the invitation to us is not to necessarily remove them, it's to redistribute the weight onto Jesus. You see, here's the reality for us. The reality is that what we need is not more time. What we need most is more of Jesus. We need more of him. The invitation is to be deeply and intimately connected to God. But here's the thing. When it comes to our restlessness, I think a lot of it is self-inflicted. In other words, I think we don't use our time, for the most part, to have this kind of connection with God, to have this kind of connection with Christ. And all we got to do is look at the screen time that pops up on our phone every Sunday that tells us, here's how you used your time, right? Like, it's alarming for us. Like here's some stats about how we use our time in America. The average American, right now, spends 2.5 hours per day on social media. 2.5 hours. That's 17.5 hours per week. For a whole year, that's 912 hours just on social media. Studies show that the average male spends 10,000 hours playing video games before turning 21 years old. 10,000 hours. They say to master anything, you need 10,000 hours to become a professional. Which means that in the time that you defeat Call of Duty, you could become a professional athlete, technically, okay? 10,000 hours. Not only that, but we spend an average of 3 hours per day watching TV, right? The issue in our lives is not necessarily the lack of time, it's more so how we use that time. Author and pastor John Piper says it like this. He says, one of the great uses of Twitter and Facebook will be to prove at the last day that prayerlessness was not from a lack of time. I don't know about you, but that's insanely convicting as I read that. That our prayerlessness, our intimacy with God, is not because of a lack of time. It's primarily based on how we use it. And so here's my encouragement for us today, that we leverage our lives and we use our time to yoke ourselves with Jesus and to become intimate with him. What that looks like, I think first and foremost, is carving out some time every single day in our life just to spend in silence and solitude with Jesus. Just get into a place where you have no rush, no hurry, and no distractions. For me, what that looks like, and I'm not joking when I say this, it's 5:30 in the morning on my bathroom floor, okay? Why my bathroom floor? Because sometimes my kids wake up early and I don't want them to find me. I don't want that distraction in that moment. And so I'm just sitting on the bathroom with my Bible open, just rejoicing in God. And I think where it starts for us is it starts with carving that time out, spending silence and solitude in the presence of God. But not only that, but I think it's leveraging these micro moments throughout the day to constantly return to him over and over and over again, just to be with him. Like what would it look like in our life is that when we're waiting for kids in the checkout line at our kids' school, if instead of scrolling through Facebook or scrolling through Instagram or trying to answer some more emails and accomplish some more tasks, that we're just sitting there praying to God. Or that we pull out our journal and just write some of the anxieties of today. What would it look like if before we go to bed, we're not just scrolling until we finally fall asleep and the phone hits us in the face? But what if during that time we just take a moment just to rejoice in who he is? Take that time to cast anxieties on him, to journal how we saw him working in our lives throughout the day. What would it look like for us to take some of these micro moments in our lives and say, Jesus, they belong to you. And all throughout my day, I'm going to return to you over and over and over again because I want to abide in you. I want to be in your presence. I want to find this kind of rest that only you can provide. For me, about a month and a half to 2 months ago, I got that Screen Time notification. And my New Year's resolution was I'm only going to spend 15 minutes a day on social media. I'm going to cut that thing down, right? And so I had this thing on my phone that basically like locked Instagram and all that kind of stuff whenever 15 minutes was over in the day. But every time, inevitably, when that happened, I would just unlock it, right? Because it's not that hard to bypass it. And about 2 months ago, I got that notification, and it's like, hey, just FYI, you're spending about an hour to an hour 25 on social media every single day. And I was like, I don't want this to be my life. I don't want to get to the end of my life and be like, I wasted it just scrolling. And so right there in that moment, just deleted all my apps. I was like, I don't want these things. I'm this close to getting rid of email on my phone. I'm not kidding. Because what I found is because there's no social media, I go to productivity mode when I have some downtime. And I'm like, I can answer some emails right now. And Jesus is like, hey, I just want you to be with me, Chris. You got like 10 minutes before these kids come in. Just be with me. Enjoy me. Seek me. Find rest and delight and joy in me. And what does that look like for you in your life? What kind of changes would it make to our life? How would it affect our marriage? How would it affect parents? How would it affect our parenting? If we parent from a posture of rest and trust in Jesus, than frustration in whatever's happening around us. How would it change our homes? How would it change our neighborhood? How would it change our city? If we said, Jesus, we want to be with you, co-labor with you, find our rest in you every moment of every single day. Man, I want to encourage you to take some steps and to find rest in him in every second of the day.